It's hard to make sense of what happened at the Ware Youth Center last month, but the Bossier Parish District Attorney is certain of one thing.
I know it was, a horrible, tragic situation for many parties.
The night of Thursday, February 7th, Jordan Bachman hanged himself in his cell. The 17-year-old from Colorado tied a bedsheet to a bar in the window. He'd been in Ware since December, held for allegedly having a gun and running from Bossier deputies. Then, that Saturday, 13-year-old Solon Peterson took his life. He tore his t-shirt into strips, made a noose, and hung it from a hinge on the door. He'd only been in Ware for a couple of weeks, accused of setting a toilet paper dispenser on fire at Houghton Middle School. The Red River Parish Sheriff's Office took the lead on the investigation. The sheriff said the deaths were unrelated, calling the situation a terrible coincidence. District Attorney Julie Jones is waiting on the final report from the sheriff's office. She told KTBS she'll probably take it to a grand jury. There's no timeline on when that will be done or what, if any, criminal violations might be considered. While law enforcement remains tight-lipped, we obtained documents that raise questions about whether those deaths were preventable had Ware followed the rules. According to this incident report from Solon Peterson's death and this letter from the Department of Children and Family Services, there were multiple violations at Ware. Among them, policy requiring guards to check on kids every 15 minutes. According to both documents, the teens were left unchecked for over an hour the nights they died. The documents also say the rooms the teens were in were not up to regulation. Had they been, there'd be no place for the boys to hang a noose.
The board had an emergency board meeting to try to see what we could do.
DA Skylar Marvin sits on Ware's board. He says they've hired a consulting firm that specializes in disaster relief.
We have contracted with them to come look at our whole facility at Ware and say what can be done, what do y'all recommend be done.
When we spoke with Marvin, he had confidence in the facility.
Ware undergoes several audits a year, and they're not including financial audits, which we do that too, but they're audits from DOC, Department of Corrections, from OJJ, PREA audits, and we've gotten, extremely high marks by all of those organizations.
Another focus, Marvin says, will be looking into mental health resources available at Ware. The documents point out that several kids, including Solon, did not get a mental health assessment within the required 72 hours of arriving at Ware.
Because we know this is a high-risk population for suicide, adolescents, and then adolescents in a stressful environment.
Dr. Michelle Yetman is a clinical psychologist at LSU Health. She has no connection to the cases at Ware, but she can shed light on just how fragile things likely are inside the juvenile jail.
All adolescents are actually at high risk for suicide. That has to do with a number of factors, mainly the adolescent brain. It's prone to impulsivity. They tend to, rather than adults who might struggle for weeks or months contemplating suicide and plan it out and talk to people about it, so there might be windows of opportunity, an adolescent might think about it for 5 hours or 5 minutes before they act on it.
Add to that the fact that 2 lives were lost to suicide so close together. Yetman says that raises concerns about what she calls the contagion phenomenon.
If you yourself are emotionally struggling, then you see that as an option because this person that you maybe loved or cared about or really well took that option.
Marvin says the Bossier Parish Police Jury offered to provide mental health resources at Ware because Bossier Parish sends kids to Ware, along with 5 other parishes. Jamie Ostroff, KTBS 3 News.
A sister speaking out about the loss of her younger brother.
Solon Peterson was the second of 2 teenage boys to take their own lives within 72 hours while being held at the Ware Youth Center in Coshada. Jamie Ostroff has this exclusive 3 Investigates follow-up. Hey, Jamie.
This is how Savannah Hall describes her little brother.
He was very vibrant and energetic, constantly wanting to learn.
This is how she remembers one of the last times she saw him.
They had the Barstow Air Show, I guess. I was walking through and I was like, oh my goodness, wait a second. Oh my goodness. And so I spent a little time with him there and then, of course, didn't know it would be the last time I would see him, but.
And this is all she knows about his final days alive.
I've read the reports. He would stay up at night and he would sing the Star Spangled Banner all night. So I truly can't imagine what he was thinking, especially for so long, being in a room with no windows by himself.
Solon Peterson had just turned 13 when he died last month. He hanged himself while being kept in solitary confinement in Ware Youth Center in Coshada. He was there because he'd set a toilet paper dispenser on fire in the bathroom at Houghton Middle School. Now his sister can only wonder if detaining Solon was the right decision.
How did this happen? Why, of all places?
We often tend to believe our loved ones can do no wrong.
Not innocent, but he was no threat. I don't think he was going to hurt anyone.
But Solon's story is more complicated than that.
From a very young age, he experienced an enormous amount of neglect, physical abuse. By the time he was 7 years old, he was with 11 different families, I think is what I counted. I can't imagine how a child must feel about that.
Foster care kept Solon away from 5 of his 6 biological siblings, including Savannah.
You suddenly have no idea, where they are, what they're doing, who they're with, if they're even okay.
Solon found his forever parents when he was 6 years old. He'd eventually be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But his sister says he managed to avoid trouble in school. Not long before Solon's arrest, his doctor switched his meds.
His psychiatrist said, have him sent to the hospital. They can detain him there, they can monitor him, watch him, and then they can do an evaluation, which is what needs to be done. Don't let them take him to the detention center.
According to reports, Solon didn't even get a psychological evaluation after he arrived at Ware. The state requires one within 72 hours.
Safe to say your brother, he was failed.
By many people.
Solon's death was the second at Ware last month. 17-year-old Jordan Bachman of Denver hanged himself just 2 days before Solon did. A preliminary investigation shows the Ware guards, who were supposed to be checking on the boys every 15 minutes, didn't do so for over an hour.
I want to find a way to ban solitary confinement for juveniles, period.
She's working with a local judge and State Senator Ryan Gaddy to make it happen. The plan? Call it Solon's bill.
There has to be hundreds of alternatives, ways that could actually help better the child or rehabilitate them in some way so that they can be a better person in the end rather than confine them.
If Savannah could say anything to her brother right now,
no matter how alone he may have felt, he was never alone.
The sad truth is she can no longer speak to Solon, but she can still speak for him.
I don't want it to happen to another kid in Louisiana, another kid in this country. I don't want it to ever be a possibility.
Now, there is some proposed legislation on juvenile justice right now. This House bill changes the language in current laws and offers alternatives to detaining juveniles to make detention more of a last resort and less of a requirement. Now, this was not filed by Senator Ryan Gaddy, but I did talk to him about his work with Savannah. He says while he is still looking into what happened to Solon and Jordan Bachman, he is not sure legislation is the answer here.
In this situation so far, it looks like there's a high standard in place already in the juvenile justice system. This might be a situation where they fell below that standard of care.
Now, that being said, Gaddy still says he has to do some more research into this. Right now, he thinks the way to go is for the state to invest more money in mental health for juvenile offenders. Now, I did some research on my own on the topic of self-harm in jails and prisons, and I found this study in the American Journal of Public Health, and it found that acts of self-harm during incarceration are significantly linked to solitary confinement, being under 18, and a history of mental illness.
Yeah. And
Now, it's a new law aimed at protecting children accused of crimes. The family of the boy for whom it's named says it could have saved his life. Solon Peterson hanged himself at the Ware Youth Center in Coshada. This was back in February.
Now, that happened just 2 days after another teenager did the same thing at the same facility. 3 Investigates has been following this story from the very beginning. And tonight, our Jamie Ostroff takes a closer look at Solon's law and whether it goes far enough to prevent these tragedies.
On the last day of the 2019 legislative session, Solon Peterson's family gathered around Governor John Bel Edwards as he signed Solon's law.
So we're relieved, we're hopeful, and grateful that so many people have put in so much time and effort into getting it passed.
The family calls it a win 4 months after a devastating loss.
Well, I know you miss him. That's why you brought the picture, right?
Solon took his own life in solitary confinement at the Ware Youth Center in Coshada. The 13-year-old was there because he'd set a roll of toilet paper on fire at Houghton Middle School. Solon's death raised serious questions about whether he should have been sent to Ware in the first place. He had no criminal history and was battling PTSD and ADHD with the help of new medications.
You know, we feel very confident in knowing that if Solon had lived 15 miles in, the opposite direction, that he would not have been in this situation, because the judge in that jurisdiction would have made a different choice for his case.
Solon's sisters, Sierra and Savannah Hall, worked with lawmakers and advocates to shape Solon's law. It was ultimately authored by Representative Melinda White out of South Louisiana.
There was a lack of clarity throughout the state on at what point you send a child to juvenile detention. It's a very traumatic experience.
Solon's law establishes a set of guidelines for judges to determine if a child should be sent to detention, back home, or somewhere else to get help. The guidelines look at things like the nature of the crime, the child's history, whether the child is a flight risk, and other aggravating factors. But does this law go far enough?
There's still a lot that needs to be done.
Solon's law does not include a ban on solitary confinement for children. That's something Savannah said she wanted the first time we spoke. She also said she was working toward that with Senator Ryan Gaddy. We caught up with Gaddy in Baton Rouge the day of the signing.
I mean, you're going to have times when a child needs to be alone to gather their thoughts or to shower or do those things, but we don't need to lock them up for 10 days in a room by themselves. It's a psychiatric nightmare for these young children.
For his part, Gaddy drafted a resolution commissioning a study of juvenile solitary confinement. It passed last month.
That commission will be made up of people in the industry and with family members who've suffered losses, and we're going to go through inch by inch all the rules and regulations to make sure that this never happens again.
You guys aren't done fighting for your brother.
We're not. Absolutely not, no. We won't stop until there is major change that is seen, understood, and enforced.
But for now, the sisters say Solon's law is a big step in the right direction.
Let's hope and pray that this bill by Representative White makes a difference going forward, okay?
Can you say thank you? Thank you.
This is a win for Solon, hopefully the first of many.
Jamie Ostroff, KTBS 3 News.